utilized and used in clinical practice today. I'm not saying it's not effective. There's plenty of studies related to mindfulness and to meditation. But what I'm saying is that within our Islamic tradition, there is something that is much stronger and more indigenous to our own understanding and practice. The latest book that my lab and I have signed on for is actually to write a book specifically on an alternative to mindfulness meditation coming from the indigenous Islamic tradition. But I'll tell you something. We first wrote this as an academic paper and submitted it to kind of your mainstream medical journals, academic journals. And we're used to papers coming back either accepted or rejected or told to revise. This particular paper came back completely red-inked. They were not ready to hear us talk about an alternative to mindfulness because they felt this is so established in the field of mental health. What are you trying to say? And then we found out the reviewers are blinded. We don't know who's reviewing, and they don't know who we are. But we came to find that the reviewer was actually Muslim. And I thought, how ironic that even within our own tradition, within our own sisters and brothers, people haven't understood the basic concepts of things like tafakkur and tadabbur, or try to extract that and put it into everyday practice or even clinical practice. And that's why I want to share with you, how do you take something from within our tradition and make it something to where you deeply feel connected emotionally to the Qur'an? Well, in Imam al-Ghazali's book, the Kitab al-Tafakkur, he talks about this concept that you cannot actually reach the state unless you sit yourself and still yourself and really deeply contemplate on what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is teaching in the Qur'an. And that brings us to the next question that I hear so many people ask, which is, I know that the Qur'an is unique. I know what it provides is unique, but I still don't feel that I can get to this point. Well, let me tell you, anything that you would try to do, whether it's mental health, physical health, emotional health, everything takes work. And spiritual health and connection is just no different. There must be time carved off for it. There must be teachers who guide and help you kind of understand how to do this. And then there's also those who can actually guide us in this process. And part of this is actually making the time. Here I direct to my sisters first. You know, especially those of you who are part of my halaqas, right in this room over here every week, know that I feel so strongly about the woman connecting through i'tikaf. Can I get a show of hands? All right. Fatabarakallah. This is my community, and welcome to Miftaah, to our community. Our women do i'tikaf, whether it's here at the masjid or at home. But most places I go and I ask this question, the brothers raise their hands consistently, but the sisters, it's lacking. And I say, why? It is a confirmed sunnah mu'akkad of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, with no distinction between men and women. And that concept of a spiritual seclusion in which a person sits and truly contemplates on the meanings of what it is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is revealing to us through our prayer, through our recitation of the Qur'an, through our dhikr and our dua. But even concepts such as that tafakkur, that contemplation, that tadabbur, of really understanding the meanings of the Qur'an. Unless you carve out that time, whether at home or here in the masjid, it just doesn't ever happen. And so part of the work that we do together, subhanAllah, in these sessions that we have is actually figuring out how to bring this to life. So today I hope to show you an example of what tadabbur of the Qur'an can look like in actuality when you bring this into your own connection, inshallah. So the example that I'd like to share with you specifically is to say, many people have been asking in this last year and a half, why do bad things happen? Why is the genocide continuing? Why is it we're not finding kind of relief and solace as much as we do, and as much dua as we make, as much aid as we send? And part of that is remembering that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in charge, and in His divine wisdom is His timing and His understanding of why things happen and why people suffer. How do you get to this point? It's by sitting down and actually reflecting on some of the stories of the Qur'an, and the one I want to choose today is a specific individual in the Qur'an, and that is Musa, the mother of Musa. I want us to sit down, and we're going to do this kind of a little bit together, just as an example of what you do later when you want to actually bring tafakkur and tadabbur to reality in your own practice. I believe strongly that in this way, the emotional connection to the Qur'an happens. In the story of Sayyidina Musa, you start with understanding his mother, and I want us to put ourselves in her shoes. That is the definition of the word empathy. You put yourself in the shoes of someone else. And everyone here is a parent or has spiritually raised and nurtured a young person. You know this feeling. The story of Musa is probably the best example, one of the best examples of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Qur'an, Inna ma'al usri yusra. It's a verse we all know, that verily after hardship comes ease. But what most people don't realize, and especially because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala repeats it in the Qur'an, and any time a verse is repeated in the Qur'an, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, pay attention. In all caps. And sometimes we hear this verse translated as, after hardship comes ease. But the word in Arabic is ma'a. Inna ma'al usri yusra. With hardship comes ease. Meaning literally the ease is tucked into the hardship. It's traveling with it even if you can't see it right away. And as hard as things are, even a genocide, there's something there of ease that is happening. So let us go to Musa, because in this story you see miraculous things. So you're sitting and you're contemplating, you're really contemplating on what it is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us in the details of the story, that we don't need to have all these details, but there's a reason. And when I look at the Qur'an and read it from a psychological lens, there is so much psychology in the Qur'an. Emotions, how people are feeling and dealing with things. So here is Musa, where she knows in this year that she's given birth to her son Musa, is a year in which Fir'aun has said every boy of Bani Israel will be murdered, will be taken. And she prays to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that somehow her son is saved this fate. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then gives her a commandment to put baby Musa into a basket into the Nile River. For the mothers and the fathers in the room, whoever held a newborn, who's completely reliant on you, the adults, to take that baby and to put them into a basket. And I don't know if many of you have been to Egypt or Cairo and seen the Nile. It's not a tiny river. And so when you put that baby into that basket and put them into the Nile River, where is your belief that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to keep this child safe, deliver him to safety and back to you? How? That the little basket won't flip over and capsize. That something or someone won't take him. Put your shoes for a moment in the shoes, put yourself in the moment in the shoes of Musa. This is part of the tadabbur. And as you're thinking about this, then we look at the verses of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala where He describes her exact emotions. He says, Jalla wa ala, وَأَوْحَيْنَا إِلَىٰ أُمِّ مُوسَىٰ أَنِ ارْضِعِيهِ فَإِذَا خِفْتِ عَلَيْهِ فَأَلْقِيهِ فِي الْيَمِّ وَلَا تَخَافِي وَلَا تَحْزَنِي. We inspired to the mother of Musa, nurse him. And when you fear for him, cast him into the river. Don't fear and don't grieve. Imagine Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala telling a mother who's about to put her baby, newborn son, into the basket, into the water. Don't fear and don't grieve. The two exact emotions that she is feeling right in this moment. Intense fear and grieving that she's not maybe going to see this newborn again, one way or another. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَنَا رَادُّهُ إِلَيْكِ وَجَاعِلُوهُ مِنَ الْمُرْسَلِينَ. I will return him to you, and I will make him one of the messengers. But she doesn't know how, why, where, when, no details. Other than Allah has said so, and this is where faith comes in. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us more, that when she puts him into the water, Allah describes the emotions of Musa. And He describes them literally. Think about the mental health and psychology of this mother, where He says, وَأَصْبَحَ فُؤَادُ أُمِّ مُوسَى فَارِغًا. That the heart of Musa's mother is aching so much. In Arabic, farigha means something that is empty, void, has nothing, right? Has been emptied out. It is actually something that is aching intensely. And she literally would have, think about again, psychology, she literally would have given away Musa's identity because she's so anxious about what's going on with this baby. She could have said, my baby, but that had she said that, they would have known this is a child of Bani Israel, off with him. And that's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِن كَادَتْ لِتُبْدِ بِهِ, she would have given his identity away. لَوْلَا أَن رَبَطْنَا عَلَى قَلْبِهَا, had we not reassured her heart. That term right there. رَبَطْنَا عَلَى قَلْبِهَا. رَبَطَ, to tie something, right, is to rabat, to tie something. Allah ties her heart over. He reassures her heart. Anyone who doesn't think there's psychology in the Qur'an, it is filled with psychology, fatabarakallah, emotions and people's interactions and understandings. And Allah describes this concept of having, and you've been in situations like this as have I, where calamity strikes, and then you look back afterwards and you say, how did I get through that? Allah ties over your heart. رَبَطْنَا عَلَى قَلْبِهَا لِتَكُونَ مِنَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ, so that she may have faith in Allah's promise. See, the story of Musa talks to us about when you're doing this tafakkur and tadabbur, really contemplating and pondering its meanings and putting yourself in the shoes of that story. You realize this is a story of trust. It's a story of faith. It's a story of the unknown and the uncertainty. It's a story of knowing that these emotions are real. Allah's not ridiculing her emotions and saying, how dare she have all this fear and anxiety. Rather, He's saying, you have the fear and anxiety, and I'm going to give you the patience and the ability to get through this. When we do that, when we reflect and tie that story to our own stories of calamities and difficulty, suddenly we start doing a lot better. And then you see another individual who comes into the story. We don't have time to go into her story, but should we have that time, and I encourage you to, because she is one of the perfected women of earth, Sayyidah Asya, the wife of Fir'aun. Because once that little baby goes through the basket with the baby goes through the river, Sayyidah Asya sees the baby, and she has never had the ability to have her own. She has everything else: power, fame, material wealth, beauty. She is the queen, but no baby. And so she knows it's going to be an uphill battle to convince Fir'aun to take this baby in. But she does, and he accepts. And interestingly, this is where you reflect into tadabbur, and this point exactly. How is it that the very person who wanted to murder Musa literally becomes his adoptive father? He's literally raised in the palace of Fir'aun, who initially wanted him dead in the first place. And then you reflect on the next point, that when he gets the baby, Musa gets into the palace, he's screaming and crying because he's hungry. And this is where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes in the Qur'an, وَحَرَّمْنَا عَلَيْهِ الْمَرَاضِعَ مِنْ قَبْلِ. And his sister, who's working already in the palace, she's known to them in the palace, she can hear all the crying. She's not saying, this is my brother. But she can see that every single woman, they keep passing him from woman to woman, none of them can quiet him or feed him. And that's when she speaks up and she says, فَقَالَتْ هَلْ أَدُلُّكُمْ عَلَىٰ أَهْلِ بَيْتٍ يَكْفُلُونَهُ لَكُمْ وَهُمْ لَهُ نَاصِحُونَ. Shall I tell you about direct you to a family that can help you in taking good care of him? And then you realize that in that way, within hours of the mother of Musa putting her baby into the unknown river, and him going to the palace, and all of this crying that happens, and his sister is able to take him right back to his mother within days, within hours. Not only is he safe, not only is he sound, but he's back in his mother's hands within hours. So when you face something impossible, insurmountable, you say there's no possible way. That is our human limitation looking at the problem, not Allah's magnanimous nature and ability. Sometimes we do this thing where we put our own human limitations onto Allah, but He Jalla Jalaluhu has no limitations. And that is what pondering these meanings of the Qur'an actually mean. And it is exactly how the verse in the Qur'an, when after the Prophet ﷺ also felt this intense level of disconnect, where after some time, the revelation was cut off, and he felt, maybe I did something to cause this revelation to cut off. Did I mess up? Did something wrong with me? And we ask ourselves this all the time. What was Musa asking herself? When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed to him, مَا وَدَّعَكَ رَبُّكَ وَمَا قَلَى. It's not that Allah is mad at you, nor has He forsaken you. When you think about these verses in a contemplative, meditative form, and bring it to your own, you take that story and you draw parallels to your own life, you start to realize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is al-mudabbir, the one who plans and is the most perfect of planners. You and I couldn't plan in this way. And it is that way that we say that it's important to read the Qur'an from a place of faith. It's not just a story. It's not just tales, fairy tales that we tell our kids before they go to sleep, or that we were told when we were in school, Sunday school, and other places growing up. These are stories in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is directly speaking to us, and through those stories, He's directly saying, this is parallels to your life. This is a message to you. And the only way it becomes and it unlocks the message that it's a letter written to you is if it's done from a place of faith in a contemplative manner. And with that, I bring us to Gaza for a moment to say in this last year, it has been so difficult, year and a half, more. Yet, subhanAllah, in that room, and the Friday night halakas that the women have with the Rahmah Foundation, and here at MCC, the many people who have come through to take their shahada, it has been incredible. Last night itself, and every Friday before that, just about, we have had a sister take shahada with us almost every single week for the last year and a half. Tabarakallah. Over and over again, and each time I asked the sister, what brought you to Islam? What's your story? What's happening? And everyone has a different story of some sort, but many of them, it was Gaza. It was Palestine. It was social media, interestingly enough, and it was looking and seeing faith, a kind of iman that they could not explain. It's the kind of iman in which people are being pulled out of rubble, completely head to toe, in dust and dirt, and other members of their family dead. And as they're being pulled out, they're saying, La ilaha illallah Muhammadan Rasulullah. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. Allahu Akbar. Or just simply Allah. You know what they're not saying? Is a four-lettered word. Why do I say this? Because the Prophet ﷺ taught us that patience, sabr, is at the first sign of calamity. As-sabr عند الصدمة الأولى. Literally. And you know the famous story in which the Prophet ﷺ passes by a woman who's crying and carrying on and wailing someone from her family. Haram, she's so torn up, someone from her family has just passed, she can't see that's the Prophet ﷺ. So when he passes from behind her and she's carrying on, he tells her to calm down, this is not the way we grieve our dead. And so she says, without turning around and seeing who he is, you don't know what I'm going through. The Prophet realizes she's not in a state of mind to really have this conversation. He carries on quietly. But the other people rush to her later and say, that's the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that was the Prophet. Right? And she's embarrassed, so embarrassed. So she goes to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and says, I'm so sorry, I didn't know it was you. And that's when he teaches us the important lesson. Patience is at the first sign of calamity. So how do you become a person that at the first sign of calamity, what comes out of your mouth is La ilaha illallah. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Alhamdulillah. How? Did you know that in Gaza, there are more huffaz of Qur'an per capita than any other place on earth. That's how. That is how people are being bombed, pulled out of rubble, people dead, complete, oops, there that goes. Complete catastrophe, complete catastrophe in front of them. And they're able to still say, La ilaha illallah Muhammadan Rasulullah. I got excited there. How? How do you become that person? You become that person when the Qur'an is real to you, when the words of Allah are deeply ingrained in you, when you've pondered them and thought about them and really made them part of your life, when they are literally, you've trained your heart with dhikr. So when the tribulation hits and comes, when the calamity happens, before you even realize it or know it, what's coming out of your mouth is La ilaha illallah, not the four-lettered word. There's no way to do that other than to know that this Qur'an is yours and to contemplate it deeply. So I hope, inshallah, in this small discussion, small example of what tafakkur and tadabbur means, how to practice it and how to do this. We gave an example of how to actually do this, and if you don't mind, I'm going to give a quick commercial break to say there's so much more to this concept. Inshallah, over Ramadan, there's a series that I'll be doing specifically on contemplation that Madistan is actually having all through the month of Ramadan, because people have asked, how do I emotionally connect with the Qur'an? How do I do this tafakkur and tadabbur, practically speaking? We've taken the book of one of our mentors, Dr. Malik Badri rahimahullah, on contemplation, tafakkur, and carefully and simplistically laid it out so that there's a session or a series you can follow throughout the month of Ramadan to really be able to understand how to do this contemplation. I hope, inshallah, that opens up our eyes and makes us committed and excited for this month coming forward. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you and I, inshallah ta'ala, and may He accept from us this month. At this point, especially in Rajab and Sha'ban, and here we are in Sha'ban, is when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam would raise up his hands and say, Allahumma ballighna Ramadan. Oh Allah, allow us to reach Ramadan. Allow this month of Sha'ban to be a month of beautification, tahliyah for us. The month before it was of purification. And as we get into the month of Ramadan and enter into its door, we're not the people who reach halfway through the month and then say, what happened to the whole month of Ramadan? We prepped for it from this month, from now. So I leave you with that, inshallah, and pray that there is much barakah in your Ramadan, much depth in your connection with the Qur'an. And I'll leave you, inshallah, with the QR codes to then join us, bi'idhnillah. Thank you again to Miftaah and to all of you. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala al-hadi Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam ajma'in. I'm just going to leave the QR code for them.
Jazakumullah.